Welcome back to the Corporate Happiness Show. I'm Jacqueline Pirtle, your host. And honestly, this show is really about happiness at work, how you can create it, thinking outside the box, but also like it ties into how to create it, privately, because it all goes together. So that's a little bit what the show is about. And my guest today, she's a powerhouse. And we met through me joining her community, the St. Pete Girl Boss group. And I tell you what, I'm so glad I joined, and I also took workshops, whatnot. I go to coffees because it's just such a really energized group. And the leader is Sandy. So thanks so much, Sandy, and welcome on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
I know, right? I know. We were really excited to do this. So we've been planning it for a little bit. So I think we should dive right in because that's what I usually do. You wear many, many hats. And you wear many hats also in a very broad background, and the many, many hats you're wearing now. So I tell you what, why don't you tell me a little bit about the many hats from a background perspective? So we roll the carpet up, from the back.
For sure. So my background is in education. I started my first 6 months of college. I was a marketing major and I was like, well, this isn't working for me. So I left for a little while and had to kind of think about what I wanted to do, because the thought of just having to climb and follow instructions. And I was like, I don't know. I want something maybe more creative. And so, which is interesting. I circle back to that, but we'll get there. And so I was like, well, I had a little one. My son was young. He was 6 months old. And I thought, maybe I'll try education. I really like kids. You get summers off. Let's go give it a go. And so I tried it, and it turned out I had this great aptitude for figuring out creative ways to tell people things, to break things down. And I also had a knack for creating safe spaces where students wanted to be. And so I really fell in love with it. So I taught middle school. My undergrad is in middle childhood education. And in Ohio, you have to minor in your subject areas, essentially. So I have science and then language arts. And then on top of that, I have master's degrees in curriculum and instruction and creative writing, and I have a gifted endorsement. So I taught middle school from 2004 until 2018. I ended up writing a gifted program and unrolling a whole thing, and did the drama club and supervised literally. I like to joke that I have helium hand, who wants to do this committee? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll do it. But it was a blast because I got to meet students in completely different ways outside of their context, meet parents, and just look at how community, surrounding the school could fit together. So I did all of that. And then when I left Ohio, I moved to Florida. And when I got here, it was the middle of the school year. I moved because of my daughter's health, and I didn't have a teaching job. So I ended up with a marketing gig that just fell in my lap. And lo and behold, wow, a lot of those same creativity skills really served me. So I ended up going back to teaching for about a year here, and then thought to myself, you know what, there's something more that I want to do. And I founded an enrichment center for gifted students, and to work with parents and teachers, and do some trainings and just work with kids, because that was an area, especially for those neurodivergent, twice exceptional gifted students, that is just, there's not a lot of resources devoted to it in school, and mostly because of the testing culture and just out of financial necessity with districts. So everybody does what they can, right? But I'm an expert. I could help people out, right? So then as I started to build this business, I realized I was really lonely. I'm used to having a whole public school situation around me, students.
Oh, yeah.
Parents,
yeah.
So I'm like, I don't have a work family. This is terrible. And I started going to networking groups, and I found I was like, oh my gosh, here's where all the creative thinkers, the sort of gifted people, that's where you're all hanging out. Right. And so it was a community that I felt embraced by almost immediately, but it was also a community where I felt like I could get some mentorship in areas where I didn't really know what I was doing. I feel really comfortable about my professional expertise, but in terms of a lot of the little business pieces, it's tricky, right? So I just threw myself into trying to meet as many people as I could. And I realized I wanted more connections with women in those contexts, because I found in mixed groups, women tended to hold back their brilliance. They didn't speak up.
Absolutely.
And that's not to say anything negative about mixed groups with men or whatever. It just was how it was. And so then I would meet on the side with some of these ladies, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so brilliant. And the collaboration sort of flowed. So it had been buzzing around in my head for I don't know, maybe a year, like, wouldn't it be cool to have a networking group of like women, and then I could have friends and this would be great. And so I just woke up one January morning, it was last year, and I just opened my phone and just started a group. I made the graphic like right off the cuff. I made it pink because I liked pink, I don't know, and just put it up there. And I was thinking, I think I invited initially 5 people, 10 people that I knew that owned businesses. And then by that afternoon, we had a few hundred, and then it just sort of snowballed. I think now we have 3,400 after a year. And I think there's like 200 in the queue that I still have to approve, but
Absolutely.
it's been a blast because I feel like I've gotten to understand how my skills sort of fit into a business context, which I don't think I really saw. Because when you're in one role for so long, you almost become myopic about what your impact,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
for sure. And so that was really cool. And just the things that I've learned, and the beautiful piece about collaboration and community building, that as a protective mechanism for business owners, is absolutely epic. I'm so grateful that women trust me with those types of relationships and continue to come and show up for us. So that's it. That's my story. And I have a background, my oldest daughter's autistic and has, extra medical needs. My oldest son is profoundly gifted, and so is my youngest daughter, and they both have ADHD. So there's all sorts of neurodivergence flying around here, and I love it. I love the different flavors that I get to handle and juggle in my life. All the different
Oh,
personalities.
absolutely.
A lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's an amazing and a very rich story and background. And I mean, like I said, I've experienced it firsthand in the St. Pete Girl Boss group and what actually is created there. And so here is what I think that our listeners really, really want to hear. And it is, so you take community, and I've spoken with other HR expert about corporate happiness before and whatnot, and community came up too, and community is coming up for you too. So community, how do you think a community directly impacts the happiness in people, in corporations, in small businesses, everywhere really? How do you think community creates happiness? Is it even important for happiness?
Oh, I think it's essential. I think it's essential. I think even if you go way back evolutionarily to human beings, right? What makes us feel safe is belonging. Because if you had a tribe around you back in the day, then like things wouldn't eat you because there would be people to, to hide you and run with and hunt and all of that stuff, right? So it comes from a very primal.
It's a great picture.
Well, right. It's true though, right? So it's like feeling like you belong is something that drives so many different, motivational factors in a person's personality in their lives, right? So that's a very basic need. And creating that, if you think about community, it's simply just a group of people that come together for a common purpose, and they share some cultural aspects, tendencies. So that the culture can be any number of things. It can be, a corporation's guidelines. It can be language. It can be any number of things. So people come together, and when they come into communities, they bond, right? So they either have these collective bonds, right, that keep people interested in serving a collective, or individual bonds. If they have friends, if they have a supervisor they really love, whatever, right? That's what keeps people coming back as part of a community. So the way that I thought about it was this: if you feel isolated, it has super negative impacts on your mental health, right? And then as such, it can impact your creativity, your productivity. You just don't feel like you have as much to contribute. Community building and the feeling of belonging is actually a protective factor in adults that have significant childhood trauma. It lends itself to resilience. So my thinking with creating a networking group, and just as I've seen too, is if you can build out a place where people feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel like they belong, you can protect them against a lot of those negative things. And then if you foster those bonds as well, then there becomes a situation where they want to contribute. They feel like their voice is being heard. It even goes back to like Daniel Pink and his motivation TED talk that he did in his book, where he talks about people want to feel like they've got, some control, right? They want to feel like they've got autonomy and have a voice. So if people feel like they belong and their voice is heard, then it's like, okay, I have a reason to be here, and it makes them, it protects them against a lot of those negative things that can happen when people feel isolated.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, doggy. So the thing is like, it's also like on a physical life level, it's exactly what you mentioned. People belong, and then they open up, and their creativity gets sparked. They feel safe, and they're, even on a down day, they can go and they're in a community that can be uplifting. but energetically has something to do too. Think about one person's energetic force. And even if you're super aligned, you have to be super aligned as a one person. And then think about the power of energy and energetic force in a group or whatnot. So I just wanted to, since I'm such an energetic nitpicker, I wanted to throw that in there. So there's on every single level of life, of wholesomeness of life, there's actually this goodness about community. Now, since I think it's just really important to put that out there, community equals happiness, and it's really, really important. And so I would think that corporations need to hear that. We start on the top. Corporations, leaders, big companies need to hear that in order to create happiness, to be able to kind of allow communities to be formed. And that would, give the HR personnel the freedom to create these communities, and invest in these communities, because that means you're investing into people and people's happiness. And then we go to small businesses, and I want to point out at the St. Pete Girl Bosses, there's all sorts of people come. There are people that work in big companies, people that are business owners, people that are, maybe taking a break because of motherhood, people that are wanting to start a business. It's all sorts, and they're coming to that community. So it doesn't have to be only corporations or only small businesses together. It's a community that you build that as a total, the value is to support each other, being heard and happy. And also I want to put that, because you're from education, schools too, right? How do you think? I mean, because I wrote Alice in a Genie, a children's book that's an emotional intelligence book, and I'm bringing it and reading it in schools. How do you think schools can actually kind of nourish the forming of communities, and not cliques, communities that are supportive and that lets children be heard and whatnot, because that's what Alice in a Genie is all about, right?
For sure. I think it's important to appreciate and reinforce individuality in such a way that it's right for everybody, right? Everybody has a place, and there's not competition here in this space. So I can speak like for my specific classroom, for example, at the beginning of the school year, I talked to my students about, and they were 7th and 8th graders, about a triage in an emergency room. And I would say, on any given day, you'll all get some attention from me, but you're going to know that some kids are going to need more, because that day their arm was cut off. they're triaged, right?
Yeah.
So if you come in and you have a sore throat, or somebody, has something that's life-threatening, where's the attention going to go? So in a classroom, that's how it has to be, as the doctor, right? So they understood that there's going to be an ebb and flow, and that everybody would get what they need. And then once you open up that conversation of, what do you need today? How can I support you? Right. So everybody
I love
feels
that.
Mm-hmm. There's not a scarcity of resources, because if somebody really needs you, they know that you can be found and seen and heard. And then you just lead by example, have conversations, create collaborative spaces, celebrating small successes, being open and honest about the process of, if you're struggling with something and it's difficult, hey, I'm having a hard time with this, and just opening up non-judgmental spaces. That's how it works in my like in classrooms. And then you can expand that out to the school in general, right? Really going and teaching people how to be emotionally intelligent, teaching people how to communicate well. If you do see problems, understanding that typically if someone is inflammatory, or they're very cliquey or whatever, it's coming from a place of pain, of difficulty for them.
Yeah.
And so approaching those individuals with compassion diffuses that stuff 9 times out of 10. So if you move this into a corporate setting where we're dealing with adults, or HR wants to engender these communities, because we're still just people, right? If you have someone who's difficult to work with notoriously, chances are they may know that. There's probably a reason they feel like there's a control, thing going on. So having safe spaces where they can connect in small groups, having, just conversations where people can feel like they can be vulnerable and not be judged, and still be respected for what they bring to the table, right? Because they're still brilliant, but maybe they struggle. So, and then really not creating competition. I think collaboration is essential. And so making sure, there's lots of opportunities for input. There's lots of opportunities for people to connect with others, and it's not consistently the same group, same faces. There's lots of different ways they could go about it. And I think creating a collective identity however they wanted to do that, if it's departmental, if it's company wide, that's important first, so that there's just a general acceptance, like, hey, your voice is heard, hey, you matter, however that needs to happen. And then you will find that, depending on departments, if it's a larger company, they all kind of have their own little identity and their own community that's going to be things that they need just because of their personalities.
But it all goes with each other and nourishes each other,
completely. And creating
absolutely
spaces,
absolutely. I mean, I had like HR people before telling me, and that's why I kind of wanted to hear from you as a community specialist. HR people said, like, listen, I mean, my backbone is my community of HR people, and without it I couldn't be so strong and forceful and really go in there and be the HR person that I want to be, because HR to me is just, I learned through these interviews that it's just, they're so important, so important. So knowing that, and an HR person listening to this interview and they're going like, well, how do I start it though? What's the wording? How could I present it to my boss or whatnot to actually get this started? We know the why it's good. We know the how, you mentioned a little bit with the breakout groups and whatnot, but how would an HR person that's listening say, hey, I want to start this, but what would you tell an HR person in how to best start this process?
I would probably start, first of all, with deciding the purpose of the community, right? So, because there can be multiple communities going on within a corporation, right? So the very first thing you always have to start with, like Simon Sinek says, is why. Why do you want to gather people? For what purpose? Are you going to have them, vibe on certain kinds of projects? Is it more of like a social thing so that they don't feel alone? Like, you have to kind of start with the purpose of the community that you want to build, right?
So let's say, yeah.
That's always it, because if people don't understand why they're there, they're going to get bitter. Like, what am I doing?
And
right?
you can't really create a presentation for your boss either if you don't know why.
Exactly. So you have a why, right? And if it's to build a positive culture where people feel like they can come to each other with ideas and things, and it builds open communication, your why is also going to guide, if you have some sort of curriculum, if you have some sort of activities, whatever, for your community, your why kind of guides that, right? Then the next thing that I would do, once you have your why and your mission and your vision and stuff, then you got to kind of set your culture. Are there specific norms? Are there places that you're going to meet? Is there a nickname? How are you going to communicate? All of those different pieces, right? Putting together a cultural framework for your community. So when people step in, it's not like going to a party and you don't know anybody and you're just like, okay, where's the snacks? And then you leave. You have to have kind of a framework. The third thing then would be to find your influencers, your change makers within your workplace. They know who they are, and talk to them first. Ask them, show them, tell them what you're thinking. Hey, in your department, I was kind of thinking of this. What do you think about that? And see if they're willing to indulge it and just allow the community to build organically. I think mandating going to any kind of community building activities is, people just don't buy it. It doesn't feel authentic. But I think that if you make it seem valuable, if you start with people who would be interested or who maybe need it, then, and have them bring a friend, then I think things can build organically. It does kind of depend on, the company.
Yeah, I like that. And really quick, what I wanted to say is it's really interesting what's coming in. It's like, basically, it's like, don't go it alone, have the idea alone, think about it, be clear about your plans and everything, but then reach out and build your own little community to get this big community started. Once again, right? It's like, you have the idea, but then you are leaning on community to get the community going. And I think that's beautiful.
Exactly. And making sure, like, again, to create inclusive spaces. So, and we try to be responsive in St. Pete Girl Boss, just like, any other organization. Like, okay, what do you need? What is it that you need? More volunteer opportunities? Awesome. Quieter spaces to connect? Great. You want more stuff about marketing? Terrific. So making sure you're always listening to people and trying to create spaces that work for them. And especially in a workplace, I think there's this, it almost feels like a pecking order based on compensation and things like that. It becomes difficult to really create collaborative spaces. So that's why, just if I were going to build out a community that was in a corporate structure, I would try to make it something that felt even in terms of the playing field, right? Where you're all sort of contributing equally, brainstorming, think tank kind of stuff. And it doesn't feel like anybody's, so you'd have to work to set up that culture, wouldn't it? Like that open and honest and comfortable culture. But entirely possible. And some of the
Oh
most
yeah.
interesting things can come from people that you would never expect. Like, wow,
Oh, and then the thing is like creativity flows, and funny enough, it hasn't even have anything to do with the job really, but everyone opens up to be creative and feel safe and warm and happy. And through that, new, creative energy can actually enter, and that makes happier working people. It creates also people that will stay at workplace even when things get a little tough, because they have their community, people that have a community at work and are happy in it, and they get out of it exactly what they need, and they bring also so much. It's this great exchange. They will not leave the job when things get tough because they have their community. So that is another real good fact to retain talent, really. It's not always about the job, it's also about the place. Well, most of the time it's about the place where you actually work and the values and whatnot. So I also want to quickly jump into, when people, we talked a little bit about before, like in other conversations with each other about, special needs children, which I want to say gifted children, special needs, the superheroes of our time, right? Because to me, it's like they're the thinkers, they're the change makers, they're the ones that are actually super connected. I work a lot with clients energetically and whatnot. That's kind of what I do. And it's just, these are the most connected young people out there. We're the odd ones, or whoever is not connected is the odd one, actually. And to kind of highlight that, right? I mean, there was this, I don't remember who said that, but a specialist went on, said he went into a house, visit a family or whatnot, and the family said, look, we have really great problem with our child and whatnot, and special needs, and we don't know what to do, whatnot. And then he sat down and he says, well, do you like this? Do you like that? And the kid said, no, 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 no. And he says, well, what do you like? He says, oh, I love music. He says, okay, show me. And the child actually went and played all these instruments and read all the notes and, all this, like an absolute genius in music. And he showed then right in that moment, and he used this speech all the time. I forget who it was, too sad. But anyway, he used it all the time. He says, well, who's the odd one here? I'm the one that cannot do what this kid can do in music. So I'm not the genius. The child is the genius. It's all perspective. So, but when they grow up, into grown up people, and they go out into the work world, where does the problem lay? And you think, what could be done about it?
I think that it's important for HR community members, anyone in a corporation, to understand about individuals with high IQ or neurodivergent individuals, that it's a neurodivergence, right? So the further you get away from that norm, that 100, whatever, once you get 2 standard deviations, I mean, think about it the reverse, right? 2 standard deviations below what would be considered a typical IQ is somewhere in the 80s. Those folks need special accommodations for the world to work for them, right? So it makes sense then that the inverse would be true, right? That if you're getting up into the 130s, 140s, the further away you get, the more you're going to feel like the world isn't quite designed for you, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, then gifted people can mask those things quite well, because they are good at fitting in, but it's still, so keeping that in mind, that there is a neurodivergence, that they may be more sensitive, they may have imposter syndrome, they may feel stifled creatively, there can be some things with that, right? Regulation stuff. Giving them a place where, if they identify that way, there are other people like them, is absolutely huge. So again, building those communities, right? Around hobbies or whatever. And I think that once you create a space like that in your corporation where you're accommodating for those kinds of needs, where if somebody has a process where they like it to be quieter, that's one thing, right? Just level the playing field. So when folks that have any kind of sensory neurodivergence can feel comfortable working, that's huge, because the brighter your person, sometimes the more difficult they have with that kind of stuff, difficulty they have, unless they have a social gift, right? Then that's another thing. So there's that. And then you want to give, the gifted brain can make, like you said, connections that are just really outrageous.
It's
incredible.
Amazing.
Seeing possibilities, right? It's like playing chess in your head, right? You can see 10 steps ahead. So I think having open forums, open places, like Google, I don't know what they call it now, but it's called 20 time. This was like a while back, they had something called 20 time. And it was, they allowed people to spend 20% of their time on like whatever they wanted, as long as it was sort of work related, I guess. I did something similar with my students called Genius Hour, but it was allowing them to
I
pursue a
love
passion
that.
project.
Genius hour. Love
Genius
it.
Hour. It was so fun. And it was all individualized passion projects. I had a kid build refugee shelters that were collapsible based on the structure of a beehive. They could store them. They were made from, and he was in 8th grade.
Amazing. Yeah.
And he built it was crazy. So with giving them some time to be able to pursue something, you know, and be creative with it and present those ideas, having a way for them to be able to put their voice out there, you know, that's important, because I think gifted people need autonomy to feel comfortable, and they need to be able to feel like they can rise through the ranks or share their ideas. And then understanding what their gifts and aptitudes are. So I think if you're an adult and you're hearing this and you fit into this area, really do yourself a favor and dig into that a little bit and understand your own strengths, aptitudes, sensitivities. There's a great thing you should look at called Dabrowski's theory of over or disintegration. Once you understand that, advocate for yourself, right?
Yeah.
If you know you're great at something, you know, infuse some of that into your work, because what I've seen is that when you step into a space and you're authentically yourself, it gives people permission to do the same, and then everyone elevates.
Absolutely.
You know, my biggest piece of advice though for those kinds of folks is give them space to work. Like, understand that sometimes their thinking is going to go very fast. Don't fetter them with unnecessary steps or structures that they don't need. And if they can get through it, give them time to be flexible and creative, and you're going to be amazed at the stuff that they can come up with.
And it boils down to, you know, at workplaces, to really get to know your people. Ask them, what do you need? Like, that's such a big factor. Don't just assume, or it's always been like that. Now, one thing though, and I have to apologize if I said this wrong in the a little bit early in the beginning, like special needs, because it's such an unfitting way to talk about this. So where does, first of all, apologies. I really want to call them geniuses because I believe in their geniusness. I've seen it over and over. But also, like, where do you think does special needs, that you know, that phrase even come from? Is it from thinking that this is the norm and that's special needs? But why? Where does it even come from? Do you know?
I'm not sure where it was coined, but I think most people don't think of gifted people as having special needs. They think of them as it's a gift. Like, here you go. I don't know about you, but most people with high IQ I know consider it a double-edged sword. Like, you know, because
unless they learn to advocate for themselves, they learn their strengths, they learn where they could need a little help, or what needs to be different, right? Because exactly. I mean, if you work best in a quiet space and you cannot work, simply you cannot focus in a loud space, that is not a special needs. That's just you knowing yourself and saying, my strength is when I'm in a quiet space, and then to advocate. And suddenly, no, that's actually not special needs. It's a normal way of human being, because everyone is different, and I need this.
Exactly. So, but if you consider that public schools and where those terms come from were designed with sort of an industrial model, that if they needed something different, it's special, right? And the thing that happens though most often with really brilliant people that aren't attended to on an individual basis and just kind of go through the ranks is there's this disconnect between effort and achievement. Right? They never had to work very hard early on and didn't make any of the requisite skills, like asking for help, struggling in front of authority without feeling like you're an imposter, like how to study, anything like that. Those skills, when everybody else is learning them by making mistakes, when the stakes are low, they never have to do that. And so for many people, there's a disconnect, right? And sometimes they don't hit that wall until like college, and then it's a whole issue. So when they have to start studying, it's like, oh my God, like, am I not, what? And that does carry over into, you know, their jobs. They're procrastinators because of perfectionism. They won't speak up if they, you know, aren't positive about something, or, you know, they underestimate what it will take to do a task. And this is not the fault of these people. This is more of the system, because there was no individualized attention. So giving gifted people early on a chance to struggle productively, because that's the point, right? We want to build resilience. I think it was Carol Dweck that talked about resilience, or maybe it was Duckworth, where they talk about how resilience is the highest predicting factor of success over IQ or anything else. And so absolutely. We build resilience by failing.
Yeah.
And then doing it again.
And
so building in
spinning
a
it
culture
into
where,
a positivity and then learning from that and knowing that that's who
exactly.
you are and it's
Exactly.
normal. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
building that into a
No,
culture for your work where it's non-punitive to try it and see,
I
then
love
I
it.
think it's
Yeah.
essential for those kinds of folks too, to
I
give them
love
all.
it. And it really goes into happiness. If this is the corporate happiness show, well, corporations and any business really, if you're dealing with people, take care of your people by asking what they want, by empowering them to advocate for themselves and to have space and everyone know that we actually take care of everyone, and if you happen to need something different, you can actually talk to us and not make it a problem, but make it an amazing embraced solution out of it, and that ties into corporate happiness totally. So
I think so, for sure. I mean, and it's
oh
one of those
yeah,
things too, that if you hired someone that is super competent and they're not doing well, that's a question to ask is, well, how can I support you? Like, let's talk about what's
yeah,
going on. Because I think for some people, they just need a little bit of that boost, that compassion, and then you'll see their performance, get where you thought it would
absolutely.
be,
Absolutely. And that ties into HR people again, which I think are superheroes, really. So
Yeah.
I've met so many great HR people. So we are actually at the end of our show. So where can people find you?
They can find me at think-bean.com. I'm on Instagram at think_bean. And then pretty soon I will have sandybean.com up and running, and you can find St. Pete Girl Boss at www.stpetegirlboss.com. And then all of my endeavors will be in those places. So I would love to have further conversation with anyone who's interested in talking some more about this. And I love being here with you. I could talk to you all day.
I know, right? We could make like a, 12-hour show out of it. We probably would lose some listeners in between, but maybe new ones coming. Maybe new ones, it will rotate, whatnot. So my thinking is this, listeners, if you have anything in these type of, or really anything, but especially in what we talked about, these type of kind of subjects and topics, whatnot, I think you should just pick up and really connect to Sandy, because we just said we could talk for hours, and you have this energy, this understanding, this background for so many incredible things. So I really invite anyone to connect with you and maybe even buy coffee for you and have a chit chat. And I know you're going to get out of the discussion with Sandy in a much, much better place and more understanding. So thank you for being on the show, Sandy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I loved it. And I hope you and all your listeners have the best day.
Thank you. And listen, we're going to redo this anyway. So listeners, thanks for being on the show. I hope you're leaving really, really pumped and with so much more knowledge. And I'll talk to you next time. This is Jacqueline from FreakyHealer.